Thanks, you're all sitting comfortably. I'm Bronwen Maddox, I'm Director of the Institute for Government. Delighted to have you here this evening in the Speaker's House. Many thanks to John Burko for that, and thanks also to Zurich Insurance, who've taken a keen interest in this element of our programme. And we do this at the Institute because it has occurred to us for many years, as it has to many of you, that the job of being a minister, and indeed the challenge of being parachuted into being a minister, is one of the most formidable things that can happen to you in a professional life. We run a programme called in a friendly way, How to Be a Minister, which has various elements within it. One is the Ministers Reflect series, which many people, many former ministers have contributed, and that takes testimony, if you like, from people who have been through exactly that experience of trying to get things done as a minister. We have many records with, it seems to be kind of ringing truth of that, in our Ministers Reflect series, which is organised, as is this whole programme, by Daniel Thornton here at the front. We're going to show a very short video of why we do what we do, and then we're going to have a conversation with Ken Clarke and Jack Straw. I'm delighted to have them both with us. Urgent message going to Ken Clarke. And as many of you know, there's likely to be a division bell at 7, so we're really going to crack on. So now let's play the video.
People get into politics and try to become ministers to change things for the better. Now more than ever, the country needs effective political leadership. But ministers today are grappling with huge challenges of Brexit, while the pressure mounts on public services, housing and infrastructure. In crises both at home and abroad, ministers need to demonstrate competence to the public. But there's little preparation before people become ministers, and while they're ministers, there's little support or professional development. This makes them less effective than they should be at achieving change, which matters for individual ministers, for the government and for the country as a whole. So what does it take to be an effective minister? Here at the Institute for Government, our role is to help make government more effective. Promoting effective political leadership is an important part of that. We do this through research, one-to-one support for ministers, roundtables and workshops. That's why we launched Ministers Reflect, a unique archive of interviews with former government ministers. It's designed to record in ministers' own words what it takes to be effective in office and how to help them get things done.
When you become a minister, you hit the ground running, you do it with very little idea of what job you're actually going to be given.
You have then to decide what you want to do if you want to change direction. And then you have to be very specific about where you want the new policies to go.
It's really important that you don't just end up stuck behind a desk in Whitehall, particularly if you've got a department like education, that you're out there listening to what's going on.
And I come from the world of business, so I automatically assumed that when you pull the lever something would happen, and I realised very quickly that in government, even if somebody says that yes, they will do something, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will.
Follow the Institute for Government for updates on the support that we provide to ministers and how that makes government more effective.
Thanks to the IFG team for putting that together. And just to emphasise, a lot of the work we do in this area is necessarily private. It's in one-to-one meetings with ministers about how to set up an office, how to work with the civil service, how to prioritise and how to get stuff done. But we're here to have this discussion on this. I'm delighted to be joined by Ken Clarke, who's been Conservative MP for Rushcliffe since 1970, and many roles as Minister, including Chancellor, Secretary of State for Health, Education, and both of our panellists, if I can call them that, have also been Home Secretary and Justice Secretary. Jack Straw joined Parliament in 1979, Labour MP for Blackburn until 2015, and again many roles, including Foreign Secretary and Leader of the Commons. Let me start off perhaps right at the beginning. Ken, when you first became a minister, what were the challenges first day?
Finding out where the building was. That was literally the case, because no one can tell me. I mean, I will try to avoid reminiscing all evening, so I'll be very brief. Because the world was very different when I was first a minister. Politics and government changes all the time. And this place we're in, maybe the same physical building nearly falling down, but the conduct of politics and the atmosphere of politics bears little or no relationship to almost 50 years ago. And the civil service has changed, certainly government has changed quite immensely. It's just the culture has changed. Some of the issues debating Europe then, debating Europe now, too short. But the actual things you're talking about, the culture, the daily experience, the mechanics, are totally changed. I first became a departmental minister in 1979. I had not expected to be sent to the department I was sent to. I'd been shadowing two others during our period in opposition, but I protested to Margaret that I'd been transport Prime Minister. I know nothing about transport. My dear boy, you will soon pick it up, she said, and put the phone down. And so that's how it's launched. That's why I had to find out if anybody knew where the Department of Transport headquarters was in Westminster. The only relevant experience I had, apart from a few years as an MP, was PPS to a minister, and then being in the government whip's office, which involved obviously dealing with the parliamentary end of business again, but actually did take me to the odd meeting in ministerial offices. That was the lot. And I think that was typical of my day. The idea that anybody was trained for any of this would have been regarded as utterly ludicrous. I'm not sure I'd overdo it now. But a whole lot of completely different personalities would be selected for a combination of personal and political reasons, and you set off to find out what you're doing. And I found, it was in the dreadful Marsham Street Towers. Fortunately, a guy met me at the door who said he was my principal private secretary. I didn't know what that meant. Turned out to be a very good man indeed, who was a great help to me. And he shook me upstairs, and I discovered I had something called a private office, etc. Absolutely nothing. What induction they're given now, I have no idea, but preparation, essentially I had nil, apart from my political obsessions the previous few years. And so I don't really know, through my long ministerial career, how all the other ministers worked out how to do the job. I think we all devised it personally, and we were very different personalities. I think, no doubt, helped by the civil service pressing me to do things, the ones I actually came to trust and get on with, I developed my own way of doing it. But I hadn't the foggiest notion whether other ministers did it as I did it. My Secretary of State was as brand new as I was. He was an old mate of mine. But you know, we kind of worked out together what our relationship was going to be with the civil service and with our colleagues. And I don't know what to describe. I think I ran a quite collective system. You haven't asked me what I think you ought to be trying to do. I won't go on and say it. I learned one where I learned firstly what the structure was. I got used to this bizarre daily practice, having meetings all the time with large groups of people around a table, trying to weigh up who these people were, not just say what their job was, but trying to get some sort of relationship with them and form a judgment of how you best worked with them and so on, devised entirely by myself. I'm more garrulous, which is your problem now. Now I'm old than I was then, but I've always been quite talkative, always been quite sociable, certainly very extrovert, I think, a bit of an optimist. By the time I finished, I was at the Treasury, and then again, after that at Justice. I always say I ran my department rather like a debating society with the top of the office, contributing all the time. If you had a department that wanted to do that, the Home Office didn't want to do that. There was old-fashioned stuff, really traditional. Only the permanent secretary would ever talk to you, giving his opinion, wouldn't let anybody else tell you what they really thought. But no, that's an aside. Well, I had to make it up as I went along.
Yeah, great. And evidently that took you some way. Jack, Does that ring true? Certainly back then, as Ken has put it, that there was really no preparation and you're plunged in.
I just want to say, in Ken's defence, that whatever he didn't know when he got to the Department of Transport, 6 weeks later he seemed to be entirely on top of the job, because the very first meeting I had with the Minister, he will have forgotten that I had, and it was 6 of my North East Lancashire colleagues and myself. Ken very kindly agreed to see us about the motorway, and Ken was absolutely on top of his brief. And as he
been very unassuming in the way you described your career.
As he continued, I was very, very lucky and fortunate in the preparation which I had, which was unusual. First of all, I worked in the Labour government between 1974 and 1977, 3.5 years as special advisor in the Department of Health and Social Security and in the Department of Environment and Transport for 6 months until it was taken away, formed a separate department. And that gave me a really detailed knowledge of what ministers did, just sitting, as it were, alongside them. The second thing, which is really rather crucial in my case, is that I married a civil servant. And we still have on the wall of the bathroom the 1.5 page letter that my wife Alice was sent by her director of establishments when she told this man that she was intending to marry a politician. And this was a list of the things that she could do or she couldn't do. Anyway, it's a page and a quarter saying that things she couldn't do, like she couldn't come with me in a walkabout, she couldn't sit in a meeting, certainly not clap if I was attacking the government of the day, whoever that was. And so it went on, but it's finished with the immortal line, "You may, however, do those things which are consistent with your wifely duties." So generous. Anyway, Alice, who actually worked for Ken for a period.
She was very good, yeah.
We had a Chinese wall, didn't want to know, there was no to share.
No, I trusted her completely. I'm sure she didn't tell you what was going on.
She absolutely did not, and it would have been completely hopeless if she had. No, thank you. And I was managed to ensure that I was not shadowing the department in which she was. But of course you absorb the sort of civil service culture, and I got to know a lot of people. And the last thing is that I became, my first job was the Home Secretary. I'd been a lawyer, I continued to take an interest in the law. I shadowed the job for 3 years before I went into government. We did a huge amount of preparation. And once Tony Blair became leader, he really worked us in the shadow cabinet. It was fairly clear that we were going to win. And there was a great effort made to stress test our policies. And the final thing was that I knew, because he'd worked with Alice, the permanent secretary in the department, and I knew where it was. And we shared a lot of stuff with us. So all that said, it's one thing to think about what it's going to be like being a minister. It's another thing to be, and I've never been a junior minister, to go in to a department like the Home Office and be presented with a series of really difficult muck or nettle decisions. And they came in very quickly. I mean, one of them was a chap called David Shaler, who was a renegade officer from the security service. Did I take him to court for being a renegade, or do we just allow him to leak? Well, I decided to take him to court, and so it went on. Do you deport this person? Don't you deport this person? What do you do about the prison crisis, which is an eternal verity? But anyway, a bit like Ken, if I may, I discovered that, roughly speaking, I can make a decision. Every so often, you made a decision which was wrong, and I learned from Ken an immortal conversation which I once had with Paddy Mayhew, great Attorney General in the Conservative government, who before the election he said, "I just want to give you one bit of advice, dear boy." So I said, "What's that, Paddy?" He said, "If you get yourself in the detritus, go in the Commons, put your bloody paws up." He said, "No ifs or buts, just apologise. And actually, if you do that and say, 'I'm sorry, that's wrong,' you can move on. If you start trying to explain a decision which is indefensible, it gets worse and worse and worse."
Jack, thanks for that. And we might come back to some of those points. The point about what you can learn in opposition and shadowing is something the Institute has heard from a lot of former ministers, and one reason we encourage people to stay in the same kind of role in opposition. Ken, you want to pick up on a couple of points that Jack has said, particularly how you make decisions and what you do when it goes wrong?
Well, I mean, it makes all decisions. First, you're going to find you've got to be capable of making decisions. I mean, I put before that one of the things I just very shortly do. The first thing you've got to do is, if you haven't already done it before you've got into a department, is ask yourself what you're doing it for. You've got to have some idea of why you've taken on this rather peculiar career. So one assumes, it isn't always the case with politicians, that you have some basic principles, some basic beliefs, that you actually have some views on the way in which government and society ought to be going, and you're able to relate to that. And then, when you master the brief, which you do have to, you know, the working, the first thing to do is I try to avoid taking any real decisions the first 6 months until I felt completely on top of the subject and felt I really, by meetings and read into it.
2 months, 3 months?
Well, my rule was don't do anything really big for 6 months. Then you'll be feel at home, you'll be self-confident with your officials, you can argue the toss with them as you feel you read pretty well as much as they do, and you're, by now, you've got yourself an agenda, you know what you want to do, so then you start doing it. Actually, after 2 years, you realise that you've made a complete pig's ear and you now understand it properly. You now believe that you have a master plan lying in front of you, what you're now really going to do, and usually then the telephone rings and the Prime Minister's having another reshuffle and you're sent off to another department that you never managed to go to.
Might even happen before 2 years.
Because of the complete lack of preparation, I usually, not always, found myself in a department that I've never expected to be in. The first weeks and months would be spent getting my head around the brief, actually understanding what were the kind of things I had to decide and what approach I was going to take to serve my own idea of what the government and what politicians should be about, and then also getting a proper working relationship with the people, working out who you could trust, who you couldn't, who was any interested in ideas, who was just trying to depend on an old departmental line, who was trying to resist you doing anything, who might be up for actually helping you pursue your own agenda. All the time, being quite prepared, because I'm slightly impulsive in taking decisions. My permanent secretary of the Treasury used to say that when he had a big crisis on, he would instantly leave his room and come running down the corridor in order to get to my room before I'd started issuing instructions as to what we should be doing. Once you get hold of me, I don't mind. Bloody great open discussion, every rank of the department expressing their view, and then of course you modify your views. It's quite obvious that you know, particularly if you've got to know somebody, he's got to know what they're talking about, and you modify it without losing sight of your aim. So, but I go back, I'm probably making it sound very ad hoc. It was very ad hoc. It was actually a fascinating experience. I did it for years and years and years and years, and the longevity of my career is the only thing that's undeniable. It did change all the time as it went along, and I became ever more competent. And then of course, once you've actually got into the department and acquired confidence and feel you're delivering your own agenda or finishing off delivering the agenda of your predecessor, which can be more difficult sometimes, that you've probably got sacked because this agenda is a bit of a mess, then you know, you begin to feel your way and get going. But it's a sort of, okay, and then you also concentrate on the presentation. You've either got political skills or you haven't. They should get better as you go on, and then you've got to decide. But nowadays, presentation comes first, and then you decide what policies will improve the presentation of the government. I do take a very old-fashioned view that you ignore that. I always cite Margaret. It is true she never read newspapers, she never couldn't interest her in opinion polls, we never had a popular policy when we were delivering it. You decide what you want to do, and then I'm quite a combative individual as well, so then out you go, and you keep selling it and explaining why you're doing, what the purpose is, and answering the criticisms and attacks as they come in. The attacks are obviously right, shift a little. As Jack said, if you made a pig's ear, you said we can't give it wrong, I used to say, if you're going to have to do a U-turn, I've done a few U-turns, do them with a bit of flourish, do them with a colour, you know, as I say, wrong, and we're dropping that.
Thank you for answering my point so directly. So, Jack, if we come back to you, the two things I wanted to pick up on. One, what tips you'd have for dealing with the civil service, say, for a new minister. And the other one, I mean, just following what Ken was saying, what you think you get better at as you're a minister.
Tips on dealing with the civil service. I mean, don't see them as the enemy. And that's the most fundamental one. And it's become a sort of running saw in British politics for some ministers to blame the civil servants and say that everything's been stuck in the civil service. My experience on both, in respect of governments on both sides of the house, was that the ministers who routinely blamed their civil servants were the ones who couldn't make decisions. Now, there were some exceptions to this, and as I say, I was lucky with all the preparation. I did have to, as it were, hit the ground running. We had to make very quick decisions because we were a new government and we were, you know, life was going to get better, if you remember the song, and of course it did. And we had a very big programme, and we brokered that with the Permanent Secretary Richard Wilson and his staff beforehand. Very occasionally, I mean, the reason why you shouldn't treat the whole civil service as an enemy is very occasionally you need to be discriminating and say, I'm terribly sorry that person's got to go. There was a chap who had been running a unit which was a bit of a backwater under the Conservatives, but we wanted to make this a sort of flagship policy. And this guy was completely useless, but he was obstructive as well. Anyway, I was expatiating across the kitchen table one night to my wife, and I happened to mention this bloke's name, and there was a silence. And then she started giggling nervously, and she said, oh God, she said, I palmed him off on the Home Office from the Treasury because he was NBG. So I said, well, thank you very much indeed. Anyway, I then did speak to the Permanent Secretary and got him gently moved. Do you get better? Yes. What?
So that was difficult.
It was difficult. Yes, I mean, if you don't get better, you have to go. That's for sure.
What do you get better at?
What you get better at? You get better at judging your colleagues and the ones who will share your collective decision making. Better at handling number 10. I mean, and a lot, certainly in the Tony Blair days, early days, a lot of ministers were frankly intimidated by the kind of number 10 machine. Again, I've been in opposition for 18 years. I was more senior, and I had a good relationship with Tony, and I wasn't going to be intimidated, so I wasn't. But I think, I mean, you know, number 10 say, and I used to say, well, private offices used to run in number 10 say. I say, well, number 10 is building, so who was it that picked up the phone? What are they saying? And I don't really, you know, if the Prime Minister wants to talk to me, that's absolutely fine. Meanwhile, this is what I'm going to do. But if you're a junior minister or a cabinet minister nervous about your position, number 10 says can be very, very intimidating. I think it's, in terms of, it's about, Bronwen, how you get better at decision making. You have to get quicker, but in my case anyway, certainly read the papers, because you know, sometimes I'd be reading the bloody papers, and you'd find a kind of nugget way down at a submission, which exploded the rest of the argument, and was about to lead to the end of your, if you hadn't noticed it, could lead to the end of your career. Not very often, but sometimes. So, I mean, yes, Ken is more instinctive than me, but I'm still pretty instinctive. And I mean, that sounds rather sort of trite. The crucial thing about being instinctive is, going back to Ken's point, you need to know what you're there for. Okay, so if you don't know what you're there for, you've had it. I did know what I was there for, you know, we were quite tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. I wanted to get crime down. I wanted to get a lot of constitutional reform, which is my responsibility, through. So we knew what we were there for. So that meant that you had a kind of template in your head against which you measured the submissions coming through. And you just get more familiar with it. Let me just say that when I went to the Foreign Office, which I was moved to 4 years later, I hadn't had any experience in foreign affairs. So in a sense, I thought, crap, what do I do next here? This is quite a big job. It had a much better building than the Home Office and much more finery. So what I did is as the Americans say, reached out. I called up Douglas Hurd, with whom I'd already had relations, asked him in, asked him for a briefing, which was extremely helpful, and asked him for a reading list. And he produced a reading list within a day, 10 books I should read. Happily, I'd already read 9, because I had a great interest in European history. And anyway, the 10th was Kissinger on Diplomacy, which is, for those of you not read it, is very good on the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, and actually rather stayed on diplomacy. But anyway, and I gradually worked out how to be a foreign secretary.
Back when the Foreign Office dealt with Europe.
Just go briefly on 2 things Jack said. I mean, really, said. Treating the civil service, the treating the civil service are the civil service the enemy, and I do agree with him. Ending the of useless ministers blaming the civil service, and the civil service are not the enemy. Some of the some best people who work with it were civil servants. It's a bit more complicated than that. Firstly, as it were, the first period of my career, the pre-Blair period, Thatcher and Major. The one thing that you discovered was that civil service culture, department by department, was very different. When you got reshuffled, you were practically moving into a different world, because some of the departments worked quite differently and had a different feel and structures to the others. And the political attitudes they took varied quite considerably as well, in my experience. So I went to a fair few by the time I finished. When we started, I was in the Thatcher government. What I said, the Thatcher government was determined to do things. It was activist, it was radical, it was controversial. Some of the departments, their reaction was trying to calm it all down. They were against change. It took some time to get used to the fact that it wasn't just a question of explaining to the minister what the policy was and how we did things here. The minister would read his red box and then come back and start wanting to change it. And I think after 2 or 3 years they got used to this. But early on, transport I didn't have the problem. The previous minister hadn't been building any roads. I was keen on building roads. So I survived my meeting with you. 2 formidable ladies used to come clattering into my office with maps and everything else. Soon got me going, and just about every bypass in the country. It was like a house of fire, very dependent on them. The Department of Health was quite good, but it didn't want any of these rows. The purpose of the Department of Health was to keep things calm. My job was to get more money out of the Treasury. Above all else, we got to minimise the amount of industrial relations problems we had. That was the early 1980s. And they had a habit of dealing with the outside world. You'd find your draft letters with a line or two would be faithfully giving your policy, whatever dispute it was. And then the Department of Health policy, they set out their own policy rather separately. There was a continuity. Once they got rid of me and the Thatcherites, they would adopt just the same approach to our opponents and try and stop them upsetting the upper card a bit. It took a long time before the Health Department, and I had to find my own people to deliver the reforms. Once I'd persuaded Margaret to have the reforms, I then had to get the civil service team together, a little team to do it. And my permanent secretary said he thought it was all very interesting. He'd been trying to follow all these debates I'd been having and all this stuff that was coming along. And unfortunately, we couldn't do much on the moment. He hadn't got the people spare to work on it. I had 6,000 civil servants. I had no idea what 2,000 did, fair to say. Because he had an enormous number of civil servants, but he got nobody to spare. So I practically recruited my own younger, pushing and ambitious men and women who, I'm not sure they would agree with me, but were actually interested in working on a rather transformative policy. Education was the only one where they were politically hostile to what we were trying to do. They'd been politically hostile. It's the only one where it was political resistance, not party political. It was the educational establishment of the time's resistance to the Ken Baker's reforms, which I'd been sent along to help them with. But they were hostile. There was no doubt. I used to have great arguments which were small p political, with the dominant deputy secretary, and I occasionally had chats with Margaret, she seemed to be traumatised by her period of education. She hated the department. I won't go on to say. Then the other thing that's now changed, what I think is a very bad change, old-fashioned and reactionary and all the rest of it, is what happened with the Blair government, which now is with Cameron and with Theresa May, this enormous number 10 establishment. All these apparatchiks who seem to think they make all the policy and they control all the presentation, and they're ringing up trying to tell you what to do. I used to head the calls when I was at Justice because the system was just going on. Number 10 were on the line, want to do this, and I said, well, number 10, I'm meeting the Prime Minister sometime discussing. I'm not really interested. And I found they were having meetings in the department with my officials. And I got them all thrown out.
What are you going to say? Because the vote's going to be at 5 to 7. Okay, your time is more constrained than many people here. So I want to go to Jack on that, and actually to both of you on just what tips you would give ministers now, bearing in mind Ken's first point that many things have changed. Then we'll come to questions.
Ken is absolutely right about the fact that different departments had very different culture and feel to them, and not much movement between them. And he's right too about the Department of Education, because I shadowed Ken, and although I had to sort of keep my sympathies fairly quiet, I was much more on his side in favour of pursuing the Ken Baker reforms than the old education establishment was, who were deeply reactionary and tied up to a really reactionary education world who devised policies for other people's children, whilst ensuring that their own kids went to private schools, a whole damn lot of them, including in the Labour Party. I think being able to tap into outside advice is very important, and I did do that. I had only 2 special advisors in the Home Office, and then 2 in the Foreign Office, whilst this number 10 was ballooning. But they were invaluable. So that's, I think, very, very important. And also advisory groups. But I mean, not the other thing I really did learn was if you've got a policy where you're pretty certain that the clients of the department are going to be resistant, as well as probably people in the department, you have to set a schedule of meetings and just drive it through. So I'll give 2 examples. One is on the Stephen Lawrence report. Now, the Lawrence report, thanks to a very good chair and all the rest of it, came out very well with a big agenda for change. I was petrified that it was going to go the same way as the Scarman report, which is also a good report on the Brixton riots in the 80s, but simply got shoved on the shelf. So I said, right, we're going to set up a working group, I'm going to chair it, we're going to meet every month. The cops are going to be there, the prosecutors are going to be there, everybody's going to be there, and we're just going to drive it through. Oh, are you sure, Home Secretary, all this stuff. Anyway, and I got the Lawrence, Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence there as well. Once people realised I was actually quite serious, and the police are conservative, but they also happily recognise an order when they hear it, and they go on with it. But if I hadn't done that, there wouldn't have been any change. The other thing was that in the fag end of the Brown government, I was very keen, this is much more a niche subject, but quite important, on piloting what were called social impact bonds, where you bring in private money for social benefit, and the private investors get some of their money back. Typically they're charities, but they may not be, if things work. And we were going to trial this in Peterborough Prison to set the prison a target for rehabilitation of offenders, have it properly monitored and measured, and the very Ronnie Cohen, a very distinguished man in the city, was leading this. And the department were very reluctant to pursue this. And the Treasury, although Gordon said he was in favour, were raising myriad of objections. So I said, okay, we're going to have a meeting every 2 weeks. I just had a meeting at the end of every meeting, we scheduled another one. And after a while, they got the point, and we got that through. I mean, so it may sound niche, but I wanted to ensure this was a bipartisan policy. I got ministers on side, but say, shifting this machine was really tricky.
Well, we're bound to go to questions, but I'm sorry, I want to say briefly, but your tips for new ministers now, someone's starting now.
Tips for new ministers, read your party's policy. Read your party's policy. Read some political memoirs, because they can be informative. Ask your boss, the Prime Minister, or your Secretary of State, your junior minister, what he or she wants you to do, and write it down. So keep a day book, so you've got the stuff not just in your memory. Ensure that you're happy with your private office, because sometimes the personality of private secretaries won't work. Then ask the permanent secretary to move them on. And set yourself a timescale. The other thing, and certainly if you're a Secretary of State, work in a collaborative way with your ministers. So these are quite elementary things. I had a meeting every Monday in every department I was in with everybody around the table, and we'd find out what each was doing.
Absolutely. Kenneth, tips?
Well, the main one I've already given. Just be clear, what it is you're wanting to do, and just keep asking yourself, are you actually making progress in actually delivering it? Are you doing it? And obviously, be clear in your own mind why you're doing it. So long as you actually have a sense of purpose, and you actually keep checking that people are delivering what they've told you they're going to deliver, you've got momentum, then you'll be able to enjoy the job reasonably well.
Actually, something that people don't remark on that much, actually enjoying it.
Well, it's much better if you enjoy it. I mean, it depends on your temperament. There are many easier ways of making a better living. So I can't understand why the devil anybody does it who doesn't enjoy it. But without naming names, I've worked with people who are just miserable the whole time, because it's a really rough trade, and you get particularly more and more nowadays. Personal pressures upon people are very bad indeed. Try and build a team around you, people you trust in the department. You want a good private office, you've more say over who's in the private office than anywhere else. They're double agents. They will tell the department what you're up to and help the department prepare for meetings with you. You've got a good private office, they'll tell you what the department's up to, and what the permanent secretary and the deputy secretary. That's much better, I can see my audience. I have to shout a bit louder so you can hear me. You need a core team inside. I mean, with the health reforms I already explained, I had to do that, and all the department joined in after a bit, because we obviously were doing it. And I had to get that keen team round me, who remained the key team, and then I got the senior officials actually joining in and hastily deciding they better participate in these, what turned out to be quite momentous events. So I concentrate on those things. Work out how you're going to keep good relations with your Prime Minister or your Secretary of State to Junior, but the Prime Minister when you're in the Cabinet, mainly with the aim of getting him or her to let you get on with it and stop trying to second guess you and interfere. You may have to have a bit of a session at first. Once they know what they want to do, then you've got to get their confidence somehow, and then bear in mind how you're going to feel and mark yourself a bit what progress you're making. Don't judge everything you do by the publicity you're getting. If you're Secretary of State for Health, you will be the most hated man in the United Kingdom for so long as you're Secretary of State for Health. It doesn't matter what party you're in. Nye Bevan was hated, and Lloyd George was hated for bringing in panel doctors, insurances, and everybody will be after you. And don't, if newspapers upset you, don't read them. What you've got to ask yourself, because this is a judgment that others will make, not just you, it's the key judgment. If I manage to keep going for 2-3 years, when you see how this is panning out, will then be, they won't remember anything about the rows you were having in the first year, they'll completely be stopped by most of your colleagues, let alone the general public. Will most people be persuadable that actually you've made a difference? Things aren't too bad really, it's coming along okay, and if you've achieved that, then you've handed on something, you've actually done something, you're in politics to make a difference, well, for good or bad, and you hope you have changed yourself, it's good, others will, you can show that things have moved, and your agenda has gone into place. I only twice had 4 years in departments. By that time, you know when we were there that you're doomed to discover you've made a complete pig's ear, or that it's gone quite well, and other people will share whichever view you come to.
Yeah, that's great. Both of you have just written a pamphlet for us. Right, we've got about 10 minutes. I'd like to ask Tulsi Naidu, who's the CEO of Zurich, UK CEO, just to say a few words about why she's and her colleagues are particularly interested in this work, and then Ken's generosity will go straight up to the division belt. I want to sorry you're in darkness, because it added marvellous conspiratorial air.
Well, actually, it is rather lovely because I can see the audience too. Thank you, Bronwen, and thank you very much. That was an astonishing masterclass in leadership and management. And I think we all sat here, those of us from the private sector, and thought every bit of that was relevant to our jobs and what we do all day. I started the day today talking to one of our colleagues who was being interviewed for something called the Senior Leaders of the Future programme in our business. And my reflection as I went through that was, at every point in the private sector, you get trained, you get 360-degree feedback, you get all the various interventions that RG does, and we take that for granted. I think the most important thing we need in this country now is strong, effective leadership and management. And they're two slightly different things, but both are really important. And we are living through a period of unprecedented change, of immense ambiguity and complexity. And for ministers coming into this, that must represent a huge challenge. So I can only commend the work RG do. We're delighted to be supportive and really, really pleased to be here today helping, because we just think this is so important. This is a crucial time to put our offer.
Thank you very much to you and your colleagues. Thanks very much. Okay, questions? I was expecting a wall of hands, in fact. I was cracking on. There's one in the middle here, and one in front. Go ahead. Do we have working microphones? No. Right, so stand up and project.
I wonder if you could tell us more of the advice you had from Douglas Hurd, because my memory of Douglas Hurd as Foreign Secretary was that he was enormously successful by not really saying anything for lots of years. And I wonder if that's what he encouraged you to do.
Great. Would you like to say who you are?
Sorry, I'm Anthony Rubin from BBC.
Great. Thank you, Douglas Hurd. And let me take the second one at the same time, yeah?
Okay. Andrew Kahn, I'm a governor of the Institute. You said that you wanted to keep number 10 away and you wanted to do things in a departmental way. But one of the issues is trying to get some coherence across departments. For example, on budgets, on money. Did you feel you got the management information you needed? And do you think Secretary of State would be interested in the management of departments? And you now have boards for departments, you will be able to, Secretary of State is supposed to chair them. Do you think that Secretary of State should be managers of a department? Do you get the information you need, did you, to do what you need to do in departments? And do you think there should be cross-Whitehall information, or should it be departmental?
Great. Okay, Douglas Hurd, so go here on number 10.
Douglas was very successful. I didn't talk to him about the particular method. I mean, in the Home Office, I spent a lot of my time trying to keep myself out of the papers, because you're unpopular as Health Secretary, you're also doubly unpopular as Home Secretary, and things always go wrong in the Home Office. And I was just going to say, don't read the newspapers. So if I knew I was going in for a stuffing, something had gone wrong, I'd put them on one side and read them 2 or 3 days later. The biggest change in politics, as in society, is the internet. It wasn't around even when I went to government in '97, and Twitter and so on, and it's transformed everything. But it was about the conversation with Douglas was about the sort of rhythm of diplomacy, really. And I mean, the Foreign Office is very different. And let me say, on number 10, in the domestic departments that I was responsible for, which was the Home Office, Home Office and Justice, which were basically the same, and Leader of the House, with which area I was familiar. I did keep number 10 away for sure. I made it clear, I say that if number 10 was to talk to me, I was available to talk to the Prime Minister. And anyway, I had a shared agenda with Tony Blair about the Home Office, and happily Gordon didn't know anything about the English legal system, and he had other things on his plate, so let me get on with it. If you're the Foreign Secretary, don't do the job unless you acknowledge that the person, and it's true at all times, the person who ultimately is responsible for foreign policy is the head of government, the Prime Minister, because they are effectively, in practice, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. So there has to be connection across Downing Street from one side to the other. And I had plenty of arguments with Tony. It worked very well, not least I was also very lucky in this respect. Tony's first diplomatic advisor, who was a very senior diplomat, David Manning, was one of only two people who we really knew very well as personal friends in the Foreign Office, and so I had just a very straightforward relationship with him. Management, I like to interfere. So one of the other tips I could just give you, every so often, if I happen to find myself with a spare half hour, I disappear down the corridor without detectives or anything, just walk down the corridor and go walk into somebody's office. And they'd be slightly surprised and ask them what they did. Or go into the canteen and just plonk myself down. You get lots of information this way, and you get a real feel for things. Or go and find the loos that, obviously they're still segregated, but go and find the loos that are used by the staff, don't break out of your own loo. Things like this. Use the main lifts, not the ministerial lifts. So in the Department of Justice, I would always use the ministerial lift and would have a kind of seminar. And one of the things I discovered in the Department of Justice was that about a third of the people taking the lift, certainly, were working in IT. It was absolutely extraordinary. I used to, every day I say, what do you do? As we got to whatever floor it was. It caused a bit of, in the Foreign Office, interestingly, because I was concerned about the organisation. It caused a bit of tension between myself and the Permanent Secretary. Very good guy and friend. We sorted it out, but there was a good board there, and I used to chair it. And I think it made a difference. And in management information, that gradually got better. And there was a much more of a sort of managerial thing. The last thing I just wanted to say on modern management methods, in the Foreign Office, I got myself a coach. This was also on advice from Alice Perkins, with whom I've been happily married for 40 years, but because she had by that stage experience in the private sector as well, and it made a big difference. And it helped the private office, and it helped the department relate to what I wanted to do.
Well, firstly, Douglas heard. Douglas is a great friend of mine, back in the leadership campaign once. He was a great foreign secretary. He wasn't born to be foreign secretary by nature, but he was, that's my point about, I have no idea how my colleagues ran departments. He temperamentally, in every way, was totally different to me. As you say, patrician, not very forthcoming, very cautious what he said, charming, immersed work, completely on top of the job. He was a great foreign secretary and very useful in cabinet discussions, because he and I, political instincts, were very similar. But Lord only knows how he ran departments. He was the last foreign secretary who didn't suffer from Jack's problem. I have the problem of number 10 and so on. I think, I have a pet theory which is too late to expound. I think the arrival of the Blair government completely transformed the whole approach to the way government was run. And Douglas would allow us to know what the foreign policy of the government was, and then I did discuss it with the Prime Minister quite frequently and regularly, and we'd have weekly meetings at least, as I did as Chancellor, you had to have. But he was the Foreign Secretary. He ran the Foreign Office, and he would take on board the Prime Minister's wishes and views, and the Prime Minister got more and more involved. What we have now is a presidential system, largely schooled by the changing nature of political climate, the celebrity culture, the presentational obsessions of the apparatchiks in number 10. The Prime Minister announces practically everything. The announced Prime Ministers in all over the newspapers daily. Other ministers may get a passing mention. And they just feel that it's necessary for them to be constantly sitting on the whole machinery of government, which is why I think both political parties are having ever less success in winning votes, and contempt for the political system is growing as the government immerses itself in this strange presentational mess. What time do you think that it's all right?
You can come back to the final thing.
Yeah, the last election, people said the two-party system was dead. At the last election, for good or ill, 43% of the population which was high even by Margaret Thatcher's or Tony Blair standards, voted for the winning party. We didn't get the seats because it dropped off in third party votes. 40% voted for the Labour Party. So, and I don't think people have always been ambiguous about their attitude towards politics, but turnout rose last time, and the two-party system, I know we've both got problems in our parties, but the proportion of turning out went up. And on the number 10 thing, it's partly to do with the internet, but it's gone.
And you can deliver. Thank you very, very much for joining us. You can deliver as you exit. If you want, you'll find all your other.
I do think the last election, I don't agree with Jack on that. There was nobody else to vote for. All the other parties in disarray. Both political parties were unpopular as parties. Most people made their mind up to vote before the night before for various reasons, and they held the nose and voted for the one they disliked least. I think to get back to a proper system, we need cabinet government, and we need political parties organised in a slightly more purposeful way.
That's pretty good. I will thank Ken and Jack. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. We have the IQ pamphlet here, the contacts to Daniel Thornton, and drinks next door. Thanks very much again for coming.